The state Senate's tax reformers want to eliminate the corporate income tax in North Carolina by 2028. Who would benefit? Brian Balfour recently addressed that topic in a John Locke Foundation research brief. Brian is Senior Vice President of Research at the Locke Foundation. And Brian, the people who might benefit the most from this are not necessarily the ones who we hear about when we hear about corporate income tax cuts. You usually hear, oh, this is helping wealthy corporations and rich people.
Yeah, and so the reason I wrote that article is try to dispel that myth that's believed and advanced by a lot of people out there that would oppose cuts or elimination of the state corporate income tax. What it really boils down to is flesh and blood workers, real people, regular people that mostly benefit from this. This is both through academic research that has found that the burden of the corporate income tax falls most heavily on workers in the form of lower or suppressed wages, and also just basic kind of common sense when you think through it. When businesses are faced with this heavier corporate tax burden, the expenses need to be paid at the expense of something else. And most businesses, the largest expense to run their business is payroll. So that's where the cutbacks are largely going to come from in order to pay that corporate income tax.
One of the things that your research brief notes is this idea that economists talk about with tax incidence. When a tax is levied, who actually pays it? People think of corporate income tax and they think, well, corporations, the businesses who can afford to pay. But it's actually people who pay. And among the people are these workers.
Right, exactly right. There's an old adage that says, corporations don't pay taxes, people do. A corporation can no more pay the tax bill than your house pays your property tax bill. The taxes, like I said, the tax incidence, which is really who is impacted by the tax. The corporation might be signing off on that check going to the government for the tax bill, but you need to trace back how these businesses and corporations respond to being forced to pay that tax bill, and then who's impacted by that response and change in behavior by the corporations. And as I mentioned, the research shows and just basic economic common sense thinking through the scenario tells you that it's workers that are going to bear the brunt of it, and typically not the big vice presidents and CEOs, right? It's the working class, the middle class workers and these corporations that are impacted the most by suppressed wages, and their earnings aren't where they could be without that corporate tax.
One of the other things that you point out is the fact that the lower corporate tax rate actually leads to economic benefits, and that then also leads to another benefit for workers.
Yeah, exactly right. And another thing the research has shown is that of all the state taxes, the corporate state tax is the most harmful to economic growth among the states. So when you're in a state that's their economic growth is stagnated or slower than it otherwise could be because of this tax burden, it's the people on the margins of employment that are hurt the most. Those people that are most in need of more opportunities, those opportunities are denied them. Or opportunities for wage advancement as well are denied them because of this tax burden. So it's not the CEOs that are necessarily harmed by this. It's going to be your average worker trying to support their family.
You have a great line in this research brief: the corporate tax penalizes workers, period. And I like that. You also point out this is something that people probably haven't seen much about, and that is raising the corporate tax rate has an impact on retail product prices. I think that's probably something a lot of people haven't thought about.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. So to the extent that corporations are able to pass some of that burden, that corporate tax burden, onto consumers, that harms workers as well, because that raises the price of these consumer goods, these retail goods that workers are purchasing. So not only are workers, their wages are not rising as much as they otherwise could. Those wages then can purchase less at the store with the retail goods they need to take care of their family because of the rising prices that are passed along. So they're really kind of hit on both ends. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. It is the working class and the lower income households that are most hardly hit by these changes to the both to their wages, the negative impacts on their wages, and the impacts at the retail outlets when they're going and their dollars can purchase less because of rising prices.
You cite a report from the Libertarian Cato Institute that shows a 1 percentage point increase in the corporate tax rate leads to a 0.17% increase in retail product prices. So a direct relationship there. One other thing let's touch on before we sign off, and that is some people will make this argument, well, businesses don't really pay much attention to taxes. It's not a big part of their decision-making process. You say in addressing that, try telling that to Apple.
Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously the big headlines were the wealthiest corporation in the world came to North Carolina, but they only came so in no small part in response to nearly $1 billion in tax incentives. Talk about the Hollywood film studios that work here in North Carolina. When a handful of years ago, they had a large tax credit. That tax credit was converted to a much more modest grant program. And what happened? The Hollywood film recording business here in North Carolina largely dried up significantly. So, try to tell me that you try to say that taxes don't matter to these business decisions, but the proof is in the pudding, as they say. We have ample evidence that big businesses and corporations do respond significantly to changes in the tax incentives in a state.
And that, of course, has direct impacts on workers, as we've been talking about earlier. If you'd like to learn more, you can go to the John Locke Foundation's website, johnlocke.org. Seek out the research brief with this headline: Corporate Tax Elimination Means Relief for Workers. Its author is Brian Balfour, Senior Vice President of Research at the John Locke Foundation. Brian, thanks so much.
Thank you, Mitch.